just heard two very powerful stories from two women in different stages of life, but with a common problem. Talk a little bit about, we gave some of the numbers, and I'll be honest, even from my end, I was surprised by the scope of just how many women over the course of a lifetime or at any one time are victims of any form of abuse. Talk about what you see coming through the doors of your organization and how it might surprise the audience, because as I said, it doesn't matter what your social, economic background, doesn't matter your color, your religion, whatever else, victims take all shapes and sizes.
Well, I'll just tell you, one Tuesday morning we always on Tuesday mornings run a Spanish language support group, and some of those women would be happy to make $10 an hour without benefits. That one morning, there was a woman looking at our boutique, which is donated food and household items and toiletries, looking for baby formula. At the end of the day, I worked with a woman whose adjusted gross family income was over $8 million. And during the course of that day, or the course of any normal week, we see it all. Really, there's no way to inoculate yourself against domestic violence. You could be rich or poor, black, white, Hispanic. You could have a great education. You could, well, as you saw with
Yep.
Pat Carrera, and as you saw with Danielle, that this is something that could just affect anyone. And what's so hard about it, of course, is that's a very confounding thing for people. They would like to think, oh, that won't happen in my community, that won't happen to my daughter. And what we do at Hope Store is not only work with victims to help them on their road to survivor, but we do a lot of work in the schools on prevention.
And I'm curious, Carla, when people come to your organization, have they already got past the denial? Do they already know at this point that they have a problem, they just don't know how to get out of it? Or do you have to convince them in many cases that you've just been brainwashed that this normal is acceptable?
All of the
Yeah.
above. And a lot of people will come to us and they go, my friend told me to come, my pastor told me to come, my sister told me to come. I don't really feel like I'm a victim of domestic violence. I'm not really sure why I'm here, because he's never hit me. And yet they're afraid to take 2 steps to the left or right without his permission.
It's petrifying as a father with daughters when you see two very well-adjusted women that were just here telling us their stories, and whatever narrative you have in your head as to who the victims are, I think people should maybe readjust their realities that it's everybody, as you said, up and down the spectrum. And Senator, I'm curious, has the law caught up with this problem in that, my God, the numbers are staggering, and obviously you're right there on the front lines in Albany on this. Does the law recognize where we are, and does it help out these victims, or is it kind of not there yet?
Richard, the answer is a little bit of both. It's catching up, I guess that's a better way to put it. In 2009, I don't want to talk politics here today, but you know, I was in the majority, and therefore I not only chaired the Task Force on Domestic Violence, but I also chaired the Crime Victims and Corrections Committee and was the ranker on Judiciary, all of which is the whole gamut of from law enforcement all the way to the courts and prison. So we began to look at legislation that had lying dormant. There were legislators who had been putting in or attempting to put in legislation to combat this. In 2009, we were able to pass the largest single number of legislative initiatives than we ever did before. So
I assume it's really easy to get an order of protection. Apparently that's not the case, and apparently the order of protection depends on the jurisdiction. And
yes, it does.
You know, and for me it was an eye-opener. I said, wait a minute, you mean if somebody comes forward and says they got a problem, and they said it's just not that easy, and then you add kids into the equation, and then the shared custody rights, and then all the other things, it's much more complicated, I think, than the outside person imagines.
And that's why Hope Store is so important, because imagine how hard this is when we sit here in the comfort of our own lives and our own safety and struggle to achieve success working with one survivor at a time. Now, this is somebody who's scared to death.
Actually, let me just give you a statistic. At least half of the victims of domestic violence are persons that are outside of the statutory definition of family. 1/2. So when we looked at the legislation, people who were of a family, traditionally as we know families, they were covered. People who were outside of that were not. So the bill that we're working on right now, for instance, authorizes that family courts have a non-family offense temporary order or orders of protection that protect these victims as well.
We've got on the screen now the hotline number. Give an idea to the audience at home, and I'm sure I always think of the people watching as they see this and how many of their personal stories they're saying, well, that sounds like me. If they call the number, or they're someone they know going through this, they get them the number, what do they get on the other side of the line?
They get a skilled, compassionate, caring advocate who will listen to what they have to say, believe what they're saying, and help them explore their rights and their options.
Well, thankfully, we're not anymore in a time where it's acceptable to raise your hand to your spouse or to your partner in any way.
Exactly right.
And sounds like none of the law is catching up to this here, but there's still so much communication. Senator CARLLA, I want to thank you both here. And I know for many people, myself included, well, obviously we know domestic violence is an issue, but you know, I think I'm pretty well read on this. I had no idea the prevalence of it. If we treat it as a crisis, which it sounds like it is, then maybe not just legislatively, but also from a societal level, we'll do things a little bit different here. Thank you both. I really appreciate the time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
That's it for RFL tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 6 p.m.